Cordeiro, Linguica, or Picanha. Brazilian steakhouse Fogo de Chão has so many meat options, it's almost impossible to decide which to order. Almost. One of the takeaways from our Fogo de Chão dining experience is that you should focus on the beef and pork. The roots of churrasco-style dining lie in Brazil's cattle ranching culture, so it makes sense that beef should be the main event. Nothing we ate during our Fogo trip was bad, but we'd skip the bacon-wrapped chicken if we went for a second visit. It was boring, and it took up space in our bellies that we'd prefer to reserve for tastier meats. This dish consisted of small pieces of chicken wrapped in bacon, then grilled. We'd guessed that it was made with boneless, skinless chicken breast based on its flavor. Since chicken breast is typically a bland, uninspiring cut of meat, even the smokiness and fat from the bacon couldn't completely save the dish. It didn't help that the chicken itself was unseasoned except for a possible sprinkle of salt. If the chicken had been well marinated like other options on Fogo's menu, it might have wound up higher on this list. Both bacon-wrapped options at Fogo are listed as medalhões com bacon on the menu. If you want to choose one, we'd go with the steak every time. However, even with beef, we found the medalhões were overall our least favorite cut of meat. Starting with the positives, the steak was a big flavor upgrade over the chicken. It had a decent amount of beefy savoriness and tasted like it had been seasoned with some kind of garlicky marinade, which worked well with the bacon. As the chicken was lacking in flavor, this might just have pushed the steak over the edge for us. The main problem with the cut was that the steak was overcooked to our taste. It was fully well done, and while it wasn't tough or super dry, it would have been more flavorful if it had been taken off the grill a little earlier.
What if somebody wants theirs well done?
We ask them politely yet firmly to leave.
The bacon, in contrast, was a little underdone and flabby. Each morsel of meat was squished together on the skewer with no airspace in between, so the parts of the bacon that were touching each other couldn't properly render and become crisp. The first of two cuts of lamb we tried was the double-bone lamb loin chop, a premium and expensive cut of meat. We could tell that it was a really nice piece of lamb, as it was incredibly tender and had a really distinct lamb flavor that struck the perfect balance between sweet and gamey. It was such nice meat that we enjoyed it despite some inconsistencies in how it was cooked. For us, tender cuts of lamb like this are best served medium to medium rare, but this chop was closer to medium well, where only the meat right next to the bone was still pink. What's more, the exterior lacked a good crispy sear. With a gray and relatively soft exterior, the chop had a somewhat bitter, burnt fat taste on the outside, so we'd guess that the grill flared up and scorched the fat cap while the meat was cooking. The meat also would have benefited from a little more salt to punch up its flavor. This would have been one of the best cuts if it had been cooked with more finesse, but the one we were served needed some help. The garlic sirloin we were served appeared to be a piece of bottom sirloin, and while that's typically not as nice as some other options on this list, it was still tender and tasty despite being cooked well done. It was a fairly lean piece of beef, which meant that it had a less intense beef flavor than some of the fattier cuts. Even so, it definitely wasn't bland either. The garlic enhanced this cut's taste quite a bit. It had an intense allium punch without overwhelming the beef or becoming bitter. The garlic sirloin also benefited from a nice sear on the grill. The outside of the meat was deeply caramelized with just a touch of crispy char. Impressively, the garlic on the exterior didn't taste burnt despite this deep level of browning. While there was some room for improvement, there was ultimately no chance that a bottom-cut sirloin was going to come out on top, so we were pretty satisfied with this cut. Both lamb options are listed together on Fogo's menu as Cordeiro, with one of them being described as lamb picanha. Perhaps this was top sirloin, if we're to take the picanha description literally. It was chewier than the lamb chop, but still fairly tender, and it was cooked to a beautifully pink medium on the inside. The lamb steak had a stronger gamey lamb flavor than the chop, which we enjoyed. Crucially, the burnt oil flavor that marred the lamb chop was not present at all in the lamb steak. However, like the chop, the steak hardly had any sear on it. The exterior was gray and a little sad-looking. Some caramelization would have vaulted this cut into the upper echelon of Fogo de Chão meats, but as it stands, we still enjoyed its strong lamb flavor. Most cuts of meat at Fogo are ones that benefit from relatively quick, high-heat cooking. The beef rib is an exception to this rule. It fares best with long, slow cooking to make it soft and unctuous. This cut appeared to be a meaty piece of beef short rib that was gently roasted. While it had a crispy caramelized exterior, it was almost falling apart on the inside. The crunchy surface of the beef looked amazing and tasted wonderful, but it was also tough, dry, and stringy. Texturally, the soft beef from the interior of the rib was a lot better. It was extremely tender and could easily be cut with a fork. Short ribs are one of the beefiest tasting parts of a cow, and the version served by Fogo de Chão was no exception, with loads of meaty umami flavor. What this particular dish was lacking was salt. Beef ribs are some of the fattiest pieces of meat, so they require a good deal of salt to truly sing. We found the rib to be a bit underseasoned, but even so, it's pretty hard to muck up short ribs in general, so we happily scarfed down our whole portion.
With a little fat around the edges, I like that. I like a little fat.
There was a point during our meal where it was clear the kitchen was struggling to keep up with the demand for meat. For a stretch, it felt like the only meat making its way around the dining room was the pork Linguica sausage, which most of the diners around us refused. After trying it, their reluctance left us scratching our heads. This sausage was packed with flavor from the seasonings mixed into the meat. Paprika and garlic were the two most prominent notes, and they complemented the fatty ground pork wonderfully. The casing also had a beautiful snappy char on it that we loved, and the sausage's texture was smooth and gristle-free. Our main complaint was that the meat inside the link was a little too soft and smooth. If the crunchy casing hadn't been there, we're not sure we would have been into that soft texture. It seemed like there might have been some rice mixed into the sausage meat, which may have contributed to the mushiness. This was an excellent piece of chicken. Bone-in, skin-on thighs are the most flavorful, juiciest part of the bird, and they are delicious when grilled. This chicken was perfectly cooked with a moist, tender interior and a decent amount of smoky flavor. The skin could have been a little crispier, but it still tasted great. Unlike most of the meats at Fogo de Chão, which are simply seasoned with salt, the chicken thighs and drumsticks have what tastes like a piri-piri-style marinade on them. The chicken we ate really benefited from being so assertively seasoned. The marinade imparted flavors of chili pepper, paprika, citrus, garlic, and herbs, which penetrated the meat all the way down to the bone. Of course, the real reason to go to Fogo is to chow down on red meat, and as nicely prepared as it was, this chicken thigh still couldn't hold a candle to our favorite cuts of beef and pork.
Red meat, we crave sustenance.
Speaking of other cuts of meat, the pork chop was amazing. It was a double-bone pork loin chop, basically the same cut as the lamb chop, but large enough to be served in slices rather than as one piece. The best part of this cut was the crust on the outside. It tasted like the whole chop was coated in some kind of pureed garlic mixture before it hit the grill. As the chop cooked, this marinade hardened into a crunchy, caramelized crust with an incredible texture and flavor. We were served a piece from near the edge of the chop, so the pork was fairly well done and on the verge of being a bit dry. However, the chop had a wonderfully strong pork flavor and was still quite tender. All in all, this was worlds away from a typical bland supermarket pork chop, and if we had room, we would have gone back for seconds. The flank steak wasn't listed on the menu, but we're glad the restaurant had it on our visit. This cut is rippled with large meat fibers, which means it has a lot of surface area with hills and valleys that develop some nice browning over an open fire.
That's grade A, top choice meat.
Although the outside of the meat wasn't very crispy, it tasted deeply seared with intense flavors and just the right amount of char. What's more, it was perfectly seasoned with salt to bring out the natural flavor of the beef. Flank steak has a reputation for being a tougher cut, and while the one from Fogo had some chew to it, it was surprisingly tender. Although the piece we ate was cooked medium well, it didn't become bland or tough from overcooking. It had a robust, grassy beef flavor with just a hint of gaminess. It lacked the sweet, luxurious taste of some of the fattier cuts, but it had a special flavor all its own. This was one of the most indulgent pieces of meat we ate at Fogo de Chão, and it was executed almost flawlessly. We love pork belly with the skin on, but if it's not done right, the skin can be too hard and difficult to eat. The skin on this piece was crisped up superbly, with a bubbly, airy texture that was reminiscent of fried pork rinds. The meat underneath was slow-cooked to tender, succulent perfection. Pork belly is inherently a fatty cut of meat, but the fat in this was well rendered, leaving mostly meat with only enough fat to give you a great porky flavor. Unlike most of the other meats at Fogo, this one was presented on a wooden platter instead of a skewer. It also came with a bowl of honey, which turned out to be an ideal pairing for the fatty, crispy pork. The only way we'd have tried to improve this item would be by adding salt. It took a little while for the ribeye to make its way to our table, but when it was finally served, it did not disappoint.
The bone in ribeye piques your interest, and then you never want anything boneless again.
The ribeye wasn't seasoned very heavily with salt, and it didn't have much char from the grill either, but neither of those things mattered because it was such an amazing piece of meat. It had a sweet, clean beefiness that the more humble cuts simply didn't possess, and it was so tender we barely had to chew it. A healthy amount of marbled fat certainly helped out in the flavor department as well. While we would have loved some crispy caramelization on the outside, the fact that there was no char meant that no bitter undertones were present in the flavor, and the pure medium-rare beef could absolutely shine. Picanha is Fogo de Chao's house specialty and possibly the most iconic cut of churrasco-style dining. It consists of thick chunks of top sirloin butchered in a way that leaves a large fat cap attached. As the meat turns on the grill, some of the fat melts and coats the exterior of the steak, creating an even layer of burnished golden brown caramelization over every square inch of beef. The fat lends the beef an almost deep-fried quality and a level of crunchiness unmatched by any cut. The part of the fat cap that doesn't melt is delicious, with a taste reminiscent of beef bacon. The meat underneath the fat is just as good. Although top sirloin isn't as pricey or luxurious as ribeye or filet mignon, it's still quite tender. The slice we sampled was super juicy and cooked to a perfect medium rare. It was also intensely salty, which can be a major asset while eating fatty cuts of beef. The meat itself was more flavorful than pretty much any other cut we sampled, and the crackling crust really put the cut over the top. If we didn't have to try 12 other cuts of meat throughout our meal, we would have gladly accepted seconds, thirds, or even fourths.